side drawer of one of the bedroom cabinets of a picture of these teddy bears all in situ. And he said
The image that stuck with everyone wasn't the trucks or the shouting or even the relocation itself, but something oddly small and strangely revealing. A photograph tucked inside a drawer showing exactly how a collection of teddy bears should be arranged. Not approximately, not loosely, but precisely. Every angle, every position fixed. The purpose of that photograph, according to those who had worked inside the household, was simple. It existed so that staff could recreate the display perfectly every single day. If they didn't, the consequences were immediate and loud, and that detail, as peculiar as it sounds, became the perfect entry point into a much larger story, one that unfolded in full view only after everything else began to fall apart. The moment the move began, the calm facade shattered. There was no quiet frustration, and no measured complaint delivered through intermediaries. Instead, there was shouting, sharp, explosive, impossible to ignore. Workers who had spent years navigating the expectations of royal service suddenly found themselves stepping back, avoiding eye contact, retreating into hallways just to stay out of range. What they were witnessing wasn't just irritation over logistics. It was something deeper, a loss of control playing out in real time. And for many of them, it confirmed stories they had heard for years, but never fully experienced themselves. This wasn't simply a relocation from one residence to another. It marked the collapse of a lifestyle that had been built over decades. For 20 years, life had revolved around a sprawling estate, a residence that wasn't just large but symbolic. Dozens of rooms, carefully maintained gardens, all and a full staff dedicated to ensuring that everything functioned seamlessly. It wasn't just a home, it was an ecosystem designed around one individual's comfort. Nearly 30 people worked behind the scenes to maintain that environment, each role contributing to a structure that made daily life effortless. Then came the contrast. The new residence, far smaller and far less grand, represented a dramatic shift. 5 bedrooms instead of 30 rooms. Limited space where once there had been abundance. Even after renovations and upgrades, it remained what it fundamentally was, a farmhouse. Functional, contained, and impossible to reconcile with the scale of what had come before. For someone accustomed to a certain level of permanence and status, the adjustment wasn't just difficult, it was incomprehensible. That disconnect became even more apparent in the expectations that followed. The requests made during the transition revealed a mindset that hadn't caught up with reality. A full staff was still assumed to be necessary. A private cook, dedicated housekeeping, personal service, security, all operating exclusively for one person. Not shared, not reduced, but intact, as if nothing had changed. It wasn't framed as a request so much as a continuation of what had always existed. The response to those expectations, however, marked a turning point. Instead of restoring the old structure, the system pushed back. Support would be limited, shared, conditional. The idea of a personal team operating solely for one individual was no longer on the table. What had once been standard was now considered excessive. And even the scaled-down version proved difficult to implement, not because it couldn't be arranged, but because the people expected to fill those roles were no longer willing. That refusal became one of the most striking elements of the entire situation. Staff were given a choice, something rarely offered in environments built on hierarchy and duty. They could opt out, and many did. Not hesitantly, not after negotiation, but directly. The reasons weren't complicated. Reputation played a role, but so did experience. Stories of difficult behavior, high demands, and volatile reactions had circulated for years. Now, with an opportunity to step away, workers took it. What made this particularly significant was the context. These were individuals whose careers depended on discretion and reliability, and they weren't in the habit of declining assignments, especially within such a structured system. Yet the response was immediate and widespread. It wasn't just about inconvenience or relocation. It reflected a deeper decision about personal boundaries and professional dignity. At the same time, long-standing employees began to leave as well. People who had spent years adapting to routines and expectations reached a point where continuation no longer felt viable. The move acted as a breaking point, forcing decisions that had likely been building quietly for a long time. For someone who had always operated within a fully staffed environment, the idea of handling even the smallest tasks independently became a real possibility for the first time. And then there were the details that bordered on the surreal. The collection of stuffed animals, you carefully arranged each night according to strict guidelines, wasn't just an eccentric habit. It required training. New staff had to learn the exact configuration, memorizing positions and angles, to ensure everything matched expectations. A laminated guide existed to maintain consistency, a physical reference for something that had to be done exactly right. When that system failed, even slightly, the reaction was immediate. A misplaced item, a small deviation, could trigger a response that affected anyone nearby, regardless of who was responsible. It wasn't about the object itself, but about control. In an environment where larger circumstances were becoming increasingly unstable, small details became the last areas where control could still be enforced. As the move progressed, and those objects, once central to daily routines, were packed away. Most went into storage, carefully labeled and transported out of sight. Only one remained for the new residents. The reduction was stark, from dozens to one, from a structured display to a single item. It mirrored everything else that was happening, a visible contraction of a life that had once been expansive. Even the logistics of the move carried a certain symbolism. High-end transport vehicles arrived, handling possessions with the kind of care usually reserved for valuable art. Boxes were labeled with titles that no longer officially applied, a quiet but deliberate refusal to acknowledge change. At the same time, practical challenges emerged. Limited space meant security arrangements had to be improvised, all resulting in unconventional solutions that highlighted the mismatch between expectation and reality. And then there were the moments that felt almost too fitting. As the relocation settled, the surrounding environment introduced its own commentary. Agricultural activity nearby brought with it strong, unavoidable odors, something entirely at odds with the controlled conditions of previous living spaces. It wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a reminder that the setting had changed in ways that couldn't be managed or refined. Local reactions added another layer. Residents weren't particularly interested in maintaining appearances or softening opinions. The presence of a controversial figure in a quiet area didn't go unnoticed, and responses reflected a mix of frustration and skepticism. Questions emerged about the broader situation, each about how someone could be publicly distanced from an institution while still benefiting from its resources. Underlying all of this was a longer history, one that explained why the transition unfolded the way it did. Accounts from former staff painted a consistent picture: high expectations, little tolerance for imperfection, and a management style rooted in authority rather than collaboration. Small missteps could have disproportionate consequences, and personal preferences often dictated professional outcomes. In contrast, other figures within the same environment were known for different approaches, emphasizing courtesy and recognition. That difference mattered. It shaped how staff experienced their roles and how they responded when given a choice. When the opportunity to step away appeared, those past experiences influenced the decision. What ultimately emerged from the entire situation wasn't just a story about a difficult move or a reduction in status. It was about a shift in power. For years, the structure had been clear, expectations flowed in one direction, and compliance followed. Now, that dynamic had changed. The ability to say no, exercised quietly but firmly, altered the balance in a way that no formal decision or public statement could fully capture. The setting may have changed, the scale reduced, and the support system diminished, but the most significant transformation happened at a human level. People who had once been expected to adapt without question chose not to. And in doing so, they introduced something that hadn't existed before in that space: limits. The result is a situation still unfolding, as shaped by tension between past identity and present reality. Adjustments continue, not always smoothly and not always willingly, but the conditions are different now. The structure that once absorbed every demand no longer exists in the same form, and the people who maintained it are no longer guaranteed to participate. What remains is a quieter, more constrained version of a life that once operated on a much larger scale. And whether that shift is fully understood or accepted is still an open question, one that continues to play out in the details of daily life, far removed from the environment where those